remarks. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, as my colleague David Parker said, Labor will be supporting this bill to Select Committee. It's an interesting debate, this one, because it is indeed rich with irony. This is the first bill the National Party has brought as government to the House on superannuation matters, which is positive. The other bills that have been brought forward involved, of course, the suspension for 10 years to the Cullen Fund, payments, pre-funding payments to that, the pulling the rug out of the 1.2, I believe, at the time, million Kiwis who had signed up to KiwiSaver by gutting the employer contribution, the government contribution. And then we have, in the name of the Honourable Peter Dunn, who I note in the previous government supported the building of those two funds, both the Kiwi and, as it were, the colloquial Cullen Fund, and now supports the actions taken by the current government. But now, of course, we have a bill which is positive, and that is the Portability, the Taxation, Annual Rates, Trans-Tasman, etc., I won't go on, but the Portability provisions, Trans-Tasman, KiwiSaver to their Australian superannuation funds to here. And yes, I would agree that it is a positive outcome. The other irony in this debate is we had Sir Roger Douglas, who I do pay tribute to for his, under the Kirk government, for putting in place a superannuation scheme that, had we had it today, we possibly, maybe on this bill we might be debating the portability aspects of the legislation, but some of the ills that Sir Roger talked about and others have in terms of people's retirement savings and a cultural lack of culture of savings, we probably wouldn't be having those debates today because we would have had that fund. Well ahead, I would have said, I think it was about a decade or 12 years ahead of when the Australians decided they would embark on a compulsory superannuation scheme. And I remember Paul Keating, as the Treasurer, took heaps. I think it was about 87 from memory, when he, or slightly earlier, when he introduced that scheme. Took heaps, I think only for about 3 or 4 years. I remember as I worked in Australia in the mining industry for a number of years, asking people about the history of superannuation, because of course it was a new experience for me to be paying in a compulsory fashion into a superannuation scheme. And of course the Australians, it's death taxes and superannuation, nobody cares, it's just what you do, it's the appropriate thing to do. The Howard government of course fiddled with it in the mid-90s in the same way. He pulled part of the rug, he didn't pull the whole carpet and the underlay out from under people, as Muldoon did in 75, as Shipley did in the 90s, as Bolger did in the 90s, as Shipley did, and ironically as the current finance minister, as he was then as well, I believe, who cut superannuation to our superannuitants and senior citizens 3 times. And then we come henceforth to today, and we face a government who has suspended payments to the Cullen Fund, done it all again in the typical Tory way, not only fiddle with super, but gut super. Bill English, who says that there is no sort of economic literacy. I think, what was the exact quote? He said, National says that borrowing to save is economic illiteracy. That was Bill English. So he's carried on that wonderful tradition that he started in the 90s, that Muldoon started in the 70s, of every time a national government gets into power, they gut superannuation. And his legacy, of course, Mr English's, will be to have passed, because the pre-funding, if it's suspended for 11 years, or 10 years, we will never recover from that. So he has decided, for political purposes, to pass the cost of superannuation unto the next generation. That will be his legacy in terms of preparing and planning this country for a viable savings plan. It's to suspend it. Ironically, as the Cullen Fund made, I believe recently, was it $2 billion? So was it economic illiteracy, as he puts it? Does he still hold the view that it's economic illiteracy to save for one's retirement? Because I suspect that will be the legacy of this government. To borrow to save, he says. Well, if that is the case, then anybody with a mortgage in New Zealand, because I know that member who interjects is a real estate agent, Everybody with a mortgage in New Zealand would never make any contribution to their superannuation retirement savings, would they? Because they've got they're borrowing on the other side of the ledger. They wouldn't do that, would they? So it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. And as he sort of fires up over the other side, as I said before, the history of the national government from Muldoon to Bolger, remember it, you know, I won't alter the age, no ifs, no buts, from 60 to 65, to Shipley and English as it was then, who cut the pension 3 times, refused to inflation-proof it, reversed all those things we did in government, reversed the lot, set up the Cullen Fund, put it to 65 and then 66% no less of the average wage, gave our elderly folks security in retirement, set out the social contract for those who are working now with an expectation of what they had to do in order to meet their retirement savings. Those Kiwis also stepped up to the plate, 1.2 million and counting of them, as they signed up for KiwiSaver to make their contribution. The government put in, the employer put in, and as I say, we set up the so-called Cullen Fund to pre-fund super. All of that, most of that, has been gutted by this government. So this debate has a touch of irony, as we have the original architect of a compulsory super scheme, Sir Roger Douglas, in the 70s contributing to this debate, as we have over there the man, Bill English, who as Finance Minister, aided and abetted by Jenny Shipley and in the Bolger government was responsible for all the savage cuts to superannuation and the increase of the age. And we have the irony of this being the first bill in respect of superannuation that has any positive effect that has been brought to this House by that government, portability. And I suspect other speakers are right, that there will be people on both sides of the Tasman who do exercise their rights to transfer their funds, who will now look at this in a very positive way. I say to Peter Dunn, I wonder if there is a side irony, if he feels irony in this debate, as a person who under a Labor government contributed very, very positively, advocated very, very strongly for the Cullen Fund and a KiwiSaver, and I pay tribute to him for that, yet sits now in a government that has basically unravelled what I think he believes in most, because I do believe he has honourable intentions in respect of these policy issues. He believed in them, he backed them, he advocated for them. The sad thing is that minister sits in a government who has torn them all asunder. And I wonder if he senses the note of history or irony in this debate. Because what this government is doing in this bill is positive, but it's on top of basically sending a bill to the next generation to pay for their super. It is on a policy platform that doesn't encourage savings, in fact undermines them, as they ripped, thank you Mr Speaker, as they ripped out and halved the government and employer contribution, as they took away some of the incentives, yet Kiwis still will sign up, because I think Kiwis have worked out you've got to make some provision. But this is a national party throughout its history, since the 1970s, whose only contribution to... And I know Mr Gilmore, being the fountain of all knowledge on all things, he may have done history in his undergraduate degree, will know that I am correct. If he looks up his encyclopedias and flicks onto the internet, he'll know, and he could Google Muldoon and super, Bolger and super, Shipley and super, Bill English and super, and he'll see that every time his party got into power, they did nothing but undermine, pull apart and crash and burn any savings culture in this country. So it is with a touch of irony in history, as we do deal with, I think, a positive bill that we will support. This is the first piece of superannuation legislation, ironically brought in by Peter Dunn, which does anything positive for Kiwis both in this country and on the other, and those Kiwis live and Australians, but those Kiwis also living on the other side of the Tasman. They will come back. They talk about legacy. They had a legacy left to them of a Cullen Fund making money, of a KiwiSaver scheme set up, huge support from New Zealanders, a platform and a savings culture being established, and it was within months that they decided to pull the pin on it. So Bill English has lived up to his National Party roots and his legacy. He will go down in history, along with Bolger and Shipley and Muldoon and the others, whose greatest impact on New Zealanders' lives was to pull the rug out from under them in respect of their retirement savings. And Amy Adams, I'll finish with this, said on newsmakers on TV that Don Brash's policies were too radical to implement.
Mr. Speaker,
Yet she said,
Mr. Speaker,
Aaron Gilmore.
Mr. Speaker.